I've been riding for 31 years, and in that time I've seen things that would shake a man to his foundation and things that would put iron back in his spine. I've seen brothers pulled from burning bikes by strangers who didn't know their names. I've seen the look on a child's face when a wall of leather shows up at her door. And I've sat across a booth from men who rode 2,000 miles on a phone call, on nothing but a road captain's word that it needed doing. I've seen enough to know that the world sorts itself into people who stand up and people who stay seated. That November night in northern Montana, I learned what it looks like when every single person in a room stays seated. There were 7 of us. We'd been running hard since Missoula, the cold biting through our gear the way it does when autumn finally stops pretending in that country, and we pulled off Highway 2 at the Rimrock Fuel and Diner. It was one of those places that exists for truckers and ranchers and people moving through, fluorescent lights, laminate counters, coffee that had been sitting since morning. We took the big corner booth in the back, the one with sight lines to both doors. Old habit. The place was half full. 3 truckers at the counter, 2 couples in booths, a few locals at the back tables nursing pies. Nobody bothered us and we didn't bother anyone. That's the arrangement, generally. People see the cuts, the patches, and they make their calculations. We've made our peace with that. He came in about 20 minutes after us. Late 20s, I'd put him at. Not tall, but built close and compact the way men come out of training. His face had that particular quality I've seen in returning servicemen, not quite present, watching the room from a distance, running some kind of continuous assessment that the rest of the world can't see. He was wearing a canvas jacket that wasn't warm enough for the weather. The bag on his shoulder was military surplus and worn down to thread at the corners. He sat at the counter 3 stools from the truckers, set his bag between his feet, and opened a menu. He sat there 15 minutes before anyone came. A woman finally set a cup of coffee down without asking, moved off before he could thank her. He wrapped both hands around it. The truckers beside him didn't look up. Then the manager came out from the kitchen. I want to tell you I'm exaggerating what happened next, but the 6 brothers sitting in that booth with me heard every word the same way I did, and none of us have remembered it differently in the years since. The manager was a heavy man in his mid-40s with the particular confidence of someone who's never had anyone push back. He came around the counter and he stood over the young man and he said he didn't want that type in his establishment. Just like that. That type. The veteran didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He said he had money, he only wanted something to eat. The manager said the booth was full, the counter was reserved, and that he'd appreciate it if he'd take his business elsewhere before things got difficult. The room said nothing. I mean that precisely. Not one person in that diner, not the truckers 3 stools down, not the couples in their booths, not the ranchers at the back table, said a word. They looked at their plates or their cups or the middle distance, and they let it happen. The veteran stood. He wasn't going to make a scene. I could see it in the way he moved, the controlled, deliberate way of a man who's been trained to manage himself in worse situations than a cold diner in Montana. He slung his bag over his shoulder. Some papers slid out of the side pocket and fell to the floor, and he bent to gather them, and in the bending his jacket pulled up and I could see the edge of a tattoo on his forearm, unit insignia. I'd seen enough of them to recognize the shape. He made it to the door. I got up. My brothers looked at me and I shook my head once, which meant wait, and I walked to the door and pushed through it. He was already 10 feet into the parking lot, his head down, moving toward the dark. I called out. He stopped. I told him he'd dropped something. He turned. I held out the papers, and when he reached for them I saw what they were, an honorable discharge certificate and some benefits correspondence, the kind that follows a man home from the service and takes forever to resolve. I didn't say anything about what I'd seen inside. I just handed them over. He said thank you. The wind was working across the lot and he was shivering. I asked him when he'd last eaten a real meal. He looked at me for a moment the way men do when they're deciding whether the question is kind or a setup, and then he told me the night before, a gas station outside Havre. I asked him where he was headed and he said he wasn't sure yet. Somewhere warmer. Maybe Billings. I said we had a booth and he was welcome to it. He looked past my shoulder at the diner and then back at me, and I told him I wasn't asking him to go back in there. I was asking him to come across the lot to our bikes, where I had cold sandwiches from the last stop and a thermos of decent coffee, and that he was going to sit with us and eat before he went anywhere else. He sat on the tailgate of a ranch truck near our bikes, and 6 Iron Cavalry Road brothers stood in a horseshoe around him in the November dark, and he ate 2 sandwiches without speaking. When he was finished he told us his name, which I won't put here, and he told us what he'd come home to: a lease that had expired while he was deployed, a family situation that had dissolved, a benefits process that was moving on its own timeline, and a job application that had stalled somewhere in a stack of paperwork. He told it flat, the way men do when they're past the stage of hoping for sympathy and have moved into the territory of simply reporting facts. By the time he finished talking I had my phone out. I called our chapter president first. He picked up on the second ring. I gave him 2 minutes of information, what I'd seen, who the young man was, what the situation was. He asked one question. I answered it. Then I heard him exhale, which is the sound he makes when the decision is already made, and he said he'd start making calls. Iron Cavalry has 4 chapters in a reach that covers Montana, Idaho, the western Dakotas, and into Wyoming. That's a lot of phone trees. That's a lot of brothers who keep their phones on. We set the young man up in a room at the Motor Inn across the highway, covered the cost for 3 nights, and told him to sleep. He argued about it for exactly 45 seconds before he stopped arguing, the way very tired people do when someone finally offers them solid ground. We gave him a number to call in the morning. Then we went back to the diner. My brothers and I did not go back inside. We parked our bikes in the lot and we sat on them, and we began to make calls of our own. By 10 o'clock there were 14 of us in that parking lot. By 1 in the morning there were 60. They came off Highway 2 from both directions, headlights swinging into the lot, engines settling one after another into silence. The manager had noticed by 11. He'd locked the door. Didn't matter. We weren't going in. The story moved the way stories move in a brotherhood, fast, and exactly as far as it needs to. You have to understand the physics of what a phone tree like ours can do in 8 hours. 1 man calls 2. 2 call 4. But it's not arithmetic, it's something more like fire in dry grass. Because every man in that chain has already decided, somewhere deep in whatever makes him who he is, that when the call comes he is going to answer it. He's already made the choice years before the phone rings. All the call does is tell him when. And when the shape of the story is a young soldier, recently home, humiliated in front of a room that stayed seated and said nothing, that call moves very fast. Men don't need long to think about what that means. Men who have stood beside brothers in hard weather and felt what that solidarity weighs understand immediately, in their bones, what the absence of it costs. By dawn, the number was 350. I want you to understand what that looks like in a truck stop parking lot on a Montana highway at first light. 350 motorcycles, every one of them Iron Cavalry, arranged in a stillness that is not the stillness of inaction but the stillness of men who have made a decision and are at peace with it. No yelling. No threats. No damage to anything. Just 350 men in leather cuts with their arms folded, standing beside their machines, watching the front door of the Rimrock Fuel and Diner as the sun came up over the high country. The state police arrived at 6:15. I spoke to the highway patrol sergeant personally. I explained that we were on public property, that we had committed no offense, and that we intended to stay exactly as long as the situation required. He assessed the situation for a while and then he got back in his cruiser. To his credit, he understood what he was looking at. At 8 o'clock the manager came out. He lasted about 30 seconds looking at what was standing in his parking lot before he went back inside and called the franchise ownership. We knew this because one of our brothers had the general manager's number, which had been obtained through legitimate channels by people in our network who had been very busy through the night. The conversation between the diner manager and his employers lasted somewhat longer than 30 seconds. The outcome, to compress what took several hours to fully resolve, the manager was out by the end of the week. That is not something the Iron Cavalry demanded. It is something the franchise owners decided when the full account of the previous evening was laid out for them, along with the fact that there were currently 350 motorcycles in their parking lot and a moderate amount of regional media attention developing. We did not manufacture the media attention. We did not have to. That is not the end of the story. In the 2 days after that morning, our chapter's network, which extends into industries most people wouldn't think to look, identified a diesel mechanic's position at a shop in Kalispell run by a retired master sergeant who had been part of our extended brotherhood for years. The position had not been posted publicly. It became posted when it needed to. The young man we'd found in that parking lot had experience with vehicle systems from his service, and he interviewed the following week, and he was hired. Our chapter coordinated with a veterans resource organization we've worked with for years to accelerate his benefits processing, which sometimes only requires someone who knows which door to knock on. He had an apartment in Kalispell by February. I drove up to see him in the spring. He was settled. There was food in the kitchen and light in his eyes that hadn't been there in the parking lot that November. He shook my hand when I came in and he didn't let go of it for a moment, and he said something I've carried since. He said, "I thought nobody saw me." I told him that was the thing about our kind of men. We are not always easy to see clearly from the outside. We look like something people decide not to engage with, and we've made our peace with that a long time ago. But we are watching. We have always been watching. He asked me why. Why a man he'd never met would get up from a corner booth and follow him into a parking lot and then spend the night on the phone calling in something 350 men strong. I thought about how to answer that for a moment. I told him it wasn't complicated. I told him there are things in this world that a man with a code cannot simply let stand. A room full of people who stayed in their seats while that happened, that was one of them. And there are some debts this country owes that the country doesn't always get around to paying. So sometimes it falls to the men who understand what a debt is to go ahead and settle it. He nodded. He understood the language of that without needing it translated. I left him in the spring light in Kalispell, and I rode south, and I thought about all the rooms I've sat in over 31 years. All the times the calculation was easy. All the times someone looked at the patches on my back and made their assumptions and moved along. And I thought about one truth that ride has taught me, over and over, on 100 different roads in a dozen different kinds of weather. The men who look the most like a threat are sometimes the only ones who actually stand up. 350 of us stood up that morning. That soldier deserved every single one.